Hello, popcorn junkies. How are you? Welcome. If you're listening on podcast, if you're watching this review, hit the subscribe button, click all the bells, and then you'll be notified whenever a movie review lands. This is a review of the Palme d'Or, the Cannes Palme d'Or winner, Anora. A new film coming from Sean Baker. Sean Baker, the director who brought us things where he started out with a movie called Tangerine. I thought it was all right. Not memorable enough for me. But he also made films like Florida Project. He's interested in those characters or people, ordinary people leading extraordinary lives, or actually quite ordinary lives, but he finds the extraordinary and the dramatic within the low-level grassroots aspirations of the unheard, the unsung, and you could argue, some would argue, the mainstream would argue, the unwashed, but they're not. This is just underrepresented people living on the margins, eking out a living, and it's the dramas therein of their lives. And I think Anora sits very much within that oeuvre. Florida Project, you know, a single mum living in a project with her daughter, you know, trying to make ends meet, tips into, you know, addiction, prostitution, how to just meet the bills, pay the bills, the aspiration, living in the flight under the flight path of people coming in and going to Disneyland. Beautiful piece of filmmaking, Anyway, so this is Anora, and the reason I give you all that context in terms of his other films, that's very much the milieu or the world or the kind of the environment, emotional, social, economic environment in which we find ourselves in this film. It stars Mikey Madison. You might know Mikey Madison. She was one of the kind of cult followers of Manson in the Tarantino film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It also stars Russian actor Mark Eydelshteyn. It's won the Palme d'Or, which is the top brass award you can win at the Cannes Film Festival. So that kind of puts it within a sort of art house area. But this is also a film that, with its indie swagger, has a certain sort of cachet and is being talked about already in terms of, will the Academy be bold and be brave enough to nominate the actors, the director perhaps of this film, even though it's extraordinarily risque, explicit and sexy, and though it is an 18 certificate. I would say that none of the sex in this film, and it's about sex really, the 18, or the language, is, I would say, gratuitous, which is odd because it's set within, you know, she's a sex worker essentially, she's a stripper. The film starts with a sort of tracking shot across the dancing and gyrating buttocks of women. Quite an achievement by a male director to make a film in which you are seeing things like buttocks, and Mikey Madison has sex a lot in this, you know, bits of the body bobbled and jobbled and jiggled about in much the way they always are in strip joints. I've never been to one, and I can't even begin to imagine what kind of a man does go to one. It's weird, isn't it? But the way in which I think what helps this not be a titillating kind of just male gaze, though the film has come in for some criticism as being just a continuation of the male gaze, is the way in which I think this film presents the world of the strip club in which Mikey Madison's character, Anora, or Annie, where she works. It's a place of kind of functional erotica. They have regular clients. The clients aren't dehumanized, but they are also creepy. I mean, you know, you watch it and you go, oh, how can she? They're all so much older than her. This is so repulsive. I mean, it is repulsive, don't get me wrong. But also you get a sense of the profession. You get a sense of the strict rules and regulations. You get the sense that there is a sort of protocol at work. There's an infrastructure. There's a backroom staff even. Yes, there's the manager who's often portrayed as in these films as kind of like an exploitative, almost pimp. I mean, he's not the most necessarily likable of characters, but he has humanity to him. He's real. It has clients that are real. So not all the clients are just awful and predatory and threatening. Some of them are just there to have a good time, and the girls have a kind of all right relationship with that. They make cash, lots of cash, and you know, all the kind of rules are there. Don't touch, you can watch, but you can't touch, and all that kind of stuff. So I think the way which it's presented is quite a sort of workman-like presentation. It's not sort of just glamorizing and just focusing on the body, though of course when the actual business you're selling is sex, you're bound to see sex. So, you know, I actually think it avoids being just kind of prurient, to be honest with you. But what is the concept of this film? Really, the concept of this film pivots around that classic Julia Roberts, Richard Gere concept of pretty woman. You know, she was so many years since I've seen it. It's a high-end kind of prostitute, escort. He pays her, and then he pays her to stay with him, and then they fall in love and all that kind of stuff. Well, this film is a kind of inverted kind of pretty woman for our time. Some are saying it's sort of like Cinderella twisted into something awful. this is, I'd say Pretty Woman is a better grab. This is, a guy comes into where she's working. He's Russian, he's young, he's connected, he's got shitloads of cash. She makes lots of cash, and he's incredibly childlike and playful and enticing. And I think this film does a really good job with Mark Eydelshteyn's character of the young the young kind of carefree, almost Russian Timothy Chalamet. He's different to the standard kind of clientele. And so she hooks up with him, she dances for him, but she allows him to get a little bit closer, more than she would do for anyone else. He's also attaching, that's partly helped by the fact that he's attaching much larger sized notes, denominations of dollars, to her thong and her underwear. And so he kind of invites her back, she kind of meets him, and her work, her sort of clearly defined, and it's important to talk about her definition of herself as a stripper or a sex worker or a prostitute, or as she becomes described later in the film, a whore, is that she has there are quite clear professional boundaries as to what she is. And I think it's an interesting film about a character, her, Anora, whose professionalism, if you like, steps over a certain sort of career-defining kind of boundary. So she tips into wanting to develop more of a relationship with him, of course, at first, because she's getting a lot of money. He offers her something like $10,000 to hang out with him for a week. She says 15,000, or he says you could have asked for 50,000. He says you could have asked for 30,000. It's a good financial arrangement for her. But she kind of gets hooked in. And I think that what's so clever about this film is the way in which it throws a really kind of macro kind of camera close-up on the aspirations and the love, the desires and the need for connection and the sort of, if you like, the fantasy of love. I mean, there's a kind of connection here. The Florida Project, she's trying to bring up a child, and that child is seeing the myth of Disneyland and the castle and this sort of make-believe world of perfect fairy tale life, whilst beneath it there's the sort of underbelly of just the harshness of just eking out your next meal. This one likewise does a similar thing, but for the idea of love, falling in love and meeting your hero or meeting your partner. And I think Anora sort of feels, even though she's entered this relationship with Mark Eydelshteyn, she feels that despite the cash incentive at the front, it's become something more meaningful for her, and therefore by extension, something more meaningful for him. What the film does really well, though, I'd say the whole film is about 20 minutes too long, and I'll tell you where I really felt the bagginess, but it is 20 minutes too long. It does a really good job of captivating us, just as Mark Eydelshteyn captivates her. This guy, is it Vanya? He's charming, he's funny, he's silly, he's playful. Partly because he's actually probably about 16. So she hooks up with him, they drink, they take drugs, he has parties. She throws in her job at the strip joint and, of course, meets with the schadenfreude, or the potential schadenfreude of all of her co-strippers who are like, I'll give it a week, it's not going to work. And you're just kind of sitting there watching the film thinking, this ain't going to end well. We're watching a film. If it ended well, we wouldn't be watching a film, would we? So something shit's coming. And I think what's really clever about this film is that in this world, in this genre, and even in the trailer, when you see a young woman, Russians shouting at her that come in a minute and her kind of getting in too deep. She's a girl in a hole. She's a woman in a hole. You invariably think this is going to involve sexual assault. It's going to involve kidnap. It's going to involve violence. It's going to be incredibly discomforting. It suggests the possibility of all these things, but it never delivers them. And I think what's kind of clever about this film is you as I say, you get to a point where you have a distinct sense of, well, how long can this keep going on? He's paying her lots of money. She's having a fabulous time. He's mental. He's living in this amazing house. He seems a bit too young for this. Is he some kind of weird tech kind of entrepreneur? No, he's the son of a very famous sort of oligarch type character. And so for at least the first 50 minutes, it's edited and shot with zest, zeal and aplomb. We're in Vegas. It's a whirlwind romance. But all the time you feel like, well, hang on a minute, where's the catch? There's got to be a catch in this film. And at times I felt like, oh, are we going to be spiraling towards some kind of Adam Sandler Uncut Gems like unraveling? Or, a dark sort of, there's going to be a dark transition into the underbelly of something really sinister going on. But no, they just have lots and lots of sex. It's very sexy, it's very explicit. She uses her skill set to keep him interested. But you just get this nagging feeling that he's more interested in his PS4 or his it's probably PS5 because he's up to the minute, isn't he? He's more interested in his PS5. And also, interestingly, while she's clearly still trying to be the temptress and keep him hooked and keep him interested. You can see there are moments, and she plays it so beautifully, Mikey Madison, of her looking at him, especially a couple of moments which really have stuck with me, where he's busy playing his PS4 and we're on a close-up of her face on his chest, staying close to him, wanting to be with him. Kind of, you can almost feel in the hug, in the fact that she's placed her head here, but he's kind of distracted playing the PS4. You sort of, and I'm sure that speaks to so many young women's relationships with their boyfriends. I know a few already where, you know, I know young women who've had those kind of relationships where the boy is just so distracted by playing and gaming and being a kid. You can just feel her striving, not in a Machiavellian way either, not in a conniving way. You can see her wanting to tentatively step from professional, transactional love connection to something more meaningful, and you can see her almost willing it to be the case in him. And because he's so sort of slapstick and silly and immature, I certainly thought for the first 50 minutes that will be in there. He's just playful at this point, but there's going to be a deeper reservoir of connection even from him too. But actually what transpires is something quite different. That sense of imminent doom and disaster, and I thought, oh, this dark twist is going to come. You know, he's going to be a dealer. He even jokes about, when she says, where does all your money come from? He says, oh, I'm head of a massive drug ring. And you think, oh, right, okay, this is where, but no, even that's a joke. It's all kosher. It's all above board. His family are just wealthy, extraordinarily wealthy. And so that thing doesn't arrive. The imminent sense of doom doesn't arrive. What arrives instead, but parked within a very adult arena of characters, is something I wasn't expecting, which is essentially a screwball comedy develops. And what happens is the family of Vanya are notified that they've got married in Las Vegas. And of course, this is a complete catastrophe for such a high-profile, well-known, affluent family. If they've got married, oh my God, this young woman, Anora, she could have half of everything he owns. Clearly, Vanya, the boy, Mark Eydelshteyn, he does this all the time. He's a misbehaved, spoiled, erratic, wild, feral child who basically runs around the world causing all sorts of problems. That basically the middle management. So what's interesting about this film is the middle management of the family are sent in by the oligarch, by Vanya's father and mother, basically. So three stooges, you feel like, are sent in to mop up the mess. They're sent to the house. They smash their way in, they get in, and basically what they're going to try and do now is try and stop this catastrophe of Vanya having got married to this young woman. And so you think, oh, okay, so the two of them are going to go on the run, and then basically Vanya's family are going to be chasing them. No, what I think is so clever, spoiler alert, is Vanya legs it. And he legs it. And that's it. He's disappeared. He's gone. She's stranded. She's now left with this really, and so what, a sort of dysfunctional foursome develops, not in a sex way, between her and these three men. You've got a guy who's kind of clearly a family friend, who's the boss of these two sort of, if you like, heavies or stooges, who looks after the family's affairs and manages this boy, Vanya. He tries to manage the situation. The two stooges completely make a balls up of trying to restrain her. They end up having to bandage her and kind of and restrain her with kind of ties and hold her on the thing. And at all stages, again, you keep thinking at some point a sexual contingent's going to come into this. There's a guy called Igor, who has a bald head, and you think he doesn't look like a good type. It's very funny because it actually references this later in the film, where she says to him in a later scene, "You had rape eyes," and he, and you'll realise why. He's kind of offended by that later in the film. But it's terrible. All the preconceived notions that I brought to his character were the same preconceived notions that we would all bring to a character such as Anora's, of her being a stripper and potentially being a sex worker. And what transpires is the family, the oligarch family, want to quash this romance. They know it's not meaningful. They know that Vanya won't feel anything for her. But of course, Anora is caught believing that there's some romantic connection between her and Vanya. She stresses the fact that they're in love. She stresses the fact that when they catch up with Vanya, he's not going to sign up to the idea of them divorcing, that she's more than just, as they keep calling her, a prostitute. They call her a sex worker. They call her a whore. And you can see there are great moments where you see her responding to being named as a kind of prostitute. She's like, I'm not a prostitute. I'm not a whore. And you can see her grappling with a sort of an imaginary, or is it an imaginary line that in her head, has she stepped over a certain set of morals into selling herself in a certain way? But did she sell herself as a prostitute, say, or a sex worker? And has she now subsequently tried to sell to herself the idea that this was actually meaningful and loving? And I think therein lies albeit that it becomes a sort of screwball comedy, there is a deep, tragic pulse to this film, and that's the tragedy, I think, of Anora's character, which you could argue gets a little bit, I think the film is a bit unsuccessful in its rhythm in the shape of it. It runs to 2 hours 20 minutes. It needed to be an hour and 50, a push, 2 hours maybe at the longest. But you know, the screwball-y stuff that happens between her and these three other men, which is very funny at times. It's a comedy of errors. They get injured. She puts up a fight. She's feisty. She can kick them. She can fight them. She's hurt them both. She's bit them. She's so rude to Igor, this bald guy who you think is going to be a sexual assaulter and a rapist. But underlying all of this are two very strong performances. And in fact, this is a film about obliterating the archetypes that we have and stereotypes we have of all different types of people. Anora, you know, she works in a strip joint, but that doesn't mean she's a sex worker. Yes, she's crossed a line to connect with this guy because she wants a route out like anyone else does. All of her kind of colleagues at the strip joint are like, oh my God, you've got a way out. Some of them are like, this is like Cinderella. Others of them are like, I give it 2 weeks and all that kind of stuff. But what is she doing? She's trying to survive. She's trying to survive. Why not try and survive if you happen to fall in love with someone who you happen to have been paid lots of money by to have sex with, but in the process of doing all of that, it turns into something that isn't sort of disappointing or doesn't sort of mean that your love somehow isn't real, or that it's somehow kind of, you know, poisoned by the fact that there was a sort of sexual transactional nature to it. So it speaks to that. But equally, Igor, who's this bald guy, so when you see the film, keep an eye on him from the get-go. He looks like a standard movie heavy. He looks like the kind of extra who doesn't get any lines because otherwise they'd have to pay him an equity fee. And he just comes in and he restrains her and he holds her. But watch his character, because all the way through and basically he's there to kind of keep her alongside the other two guys as the rest of the film is them running around various parts of New York, Coney Island, etc., trying to find Vanya in order to get them both to go to the court to annul the marriage and cease this possibility that Anora could suddenly have a claim to the incredible wealth and half of this oligarch's empire, if you like. So there's the comedy and there's the kind of weird kind of camaraderie between those four. It's funny. It goes on a bit too long. I think they lent on it a bit too much. And it really, when they just lent on the comedy and the interaction of the four of them, it just started to get a bit thin and a bit tiresome and a bit repetitive. Not massively, and I'm being hypercritical here. And what you feel all the way through it is this young woman trying to make sense of perhaps a line that she's crossed, that she has never wanted to cross in her professional life as a stripper. She's crossed that line. She then felt that there was a possibility that having crossed that line, it didn't really matter because actually a connection has been built and made, and there is real love there, a la Pretty Woman, a la Cinderella. She then discovers quite quickly that actually he's not coming back. So he's done a runner, and as these three stooges who basically mop up all the mess in the family every time this boy goes AWOL, as they say, he's not coming back, he's not interested, and she doesn't believe it. And so we share in Anora's, well, just the light is removed from her eyes. She realizes that it was just a transactional thing. She realizes that, or she reluctantly realizes that actually he hasn't got any more sort of meaningful connection to her than the temporariness of the transactionalness of everything that they went through, right down to the fact that, again, spoiler, when they do eventually stumble across him, he's back at the same strip joint that he met her at, having a session in one of the rooms with the woman who most hated her. And so you can't help but feel, oh, the catastrophe, the downfall, the embarrassment, the humiliation, the sense of degradation that poor Anora feels. All of the performances were absolutely sensational, albeit that it kind of just went, they were mining the same comedic sort of reservoir at times, I felt, in the middle of the film, towards the end of the film. It was a really meaningful alternative, and it was refreshing that it never tipped into a sort of dark violence or a dark underbelly of sexual threat. There was no sexual threat, and in a way it's a film that completely neuters kind of all of the kind of prejudices you bring to any type. And really, for me, the biggest prejudice, because I don't believe that anyone who works in a strip joint doesn't have moral boundaries and isn't just professional, and it's a totally valid form of work as long as that person is as best as possible as anyone in any line of work is, making their own choices. But again, it was really successful in puncturing my idea of this guy Igor, this sort of thug, this skin-headed thug who even she thought had rape eyes. And we build to, and he's the only character in the film who gradually across the film you begin to realise, it's that funny detail that Nadia often says, and women will say, it's the small things that we want from men, not the big things, it's the small things. In the small things you feel love. And I'm urging you, when you see this film, watch Igor from the beginning. They even joke about how cliched his name is. It sounds like a rapist's name. But look at the way in which he, all the way through the film, does small things for her, whether it be having brought a scarf when they're kind of bundling her through the cold into a car, whether it be he pours her a drink when they're on a private jet flying somewhere to annul the marriage, or whether it's when he lights her a cigarette because he wants to do, and he lights both cigarettes. There are so many really considered gentle moments. There's even a moment where they're restraining her right at the beginning when there's this huge great set piece where a huge fight breaks out. It's in the trailer. They're all trying to restrain her, and Igor's trying to restrain her, and he's having to hold her quite aggressively. He manages to play that. He's even lying under her, and it's wrong, but you think to yourself, at some point these three guys, she's a sex worker, she's a stripper, she's sexual, has been sexual, they know that they've met through a stripper, through a strip club. They're going to take advantage of her, but at no point do they. Igor is holding her, and he's literally holding her for her own good, and actually for his own good, so he doesn't get bitten by her. And I thought that was quite a nice inversion and tipping on the head of sort of storytelling expectations, really, around the male characters. It was really nice at the end of this film to have a really nice male character. And the final scene, I am going to talk about it in detail. Big spoiler alert. We get to the very end. Won't tell you exactly what happens with Vanya, but suffice it to say, Vanya's a nasty little fucking spoilt shit. What a bastard. What a nasty little bastard, but brilliantly played, brilliantly played. You really bought into how enamoured she was with him and all of the possibilities that she felt she could have with him. But anyway, once all that's gone, there's an incredible, and it is a screwball comedy, but it's laced almost like fentanyl with a darker thread, a moral beat, a sort of just a really emotionally complicated sort of underbelly to the whole proceedings, where she realizes in the car in this final scene that this guy, Igor, has actually been incredibly kind to her. He's also secretly managed to squirrel away an expensive ring that obviously they used to get married in Vegas. So he squirreled away. These oligarchs aren't going to miss it. And he gives it to her. Could be life-changing for her. And she pivots in a car in a wondrous moment. In a close-up shot, you see her processing the fact that this guy, he's been really kind to her across the time. She thought he was a rapist. There's been no suggestion of any romance. And there was a point where Maddie leaned over and said, "Oh my God, maybe this is it. Maybe they're the ones that are going to fall in love." And I thought the same thing. I thought, oh God, maybe the connection's going to be between these two. She steps towards that, but she steps towards it in the only way she thinks he'd want it. And she gets on top of him. And it's an incredibly awkward, painful, difficult scene to just sit and watch, because she then really tries to, in a sense, I'm going to have to say it, there's no other way to say it, to sort of arouse him, make him have sex. And as she does this, and it's kind of, there's no music, it's just the sound of the windscreen wipers and the rain's coming down, and the engine is just running. And he looks almost stunned, and he looks almost sort of disassociated himself. She's made a prediction or an expectation or a presumption about what he would want. So she goes back to the transactional process of giving this guy sex to say thank you, or to connect with him in a sense, for giving her these things and showing kindness when no one else would show kindness. And he stops her, and he holds her head, and he puts her head against his chest, and she starts to cry. Wow. It was such a powerful, for me as a man, as a heterosexual white male, to see a white male in a film presented in a way that didn't suggest all he wanted was sex, that he actually wanted a more meaningful connection, and that he had the emotional sophistication to see that she didn't need to do this, was really, it was a huge relief, because sometimes it does get a little bit lonely out there when you watch representations of men and you think, well, and I agree with it as a father of daughters, don't get me wrong. I sign up to it all the time. We're fucking useless and we're fucking nasty and there's misogyny everywhere all the bloody time. But just every now and then it's quite nice just to get a moment where you go, oh, what a relief. He wasn't like that, and he stopped her. And you were just left feeling, oh, the complications. And so this is an incredibly moving, funny, clever, if overly long film, which really succeeds. And as I've said a few times, unpicking and contradicting all of our sort of established prejudices, feelings, assumptions about types of people, or people who look a certain way or do a certain job. And again, as Sean Baker's proved, the director, he's focused in on the lives, the actions, the loves, the hopes, the aspirations, the fears, and the dead ends that a lot of people who are not seen by the mainstream going about their lives, or the middle classes, or, even not even the middle classes, the working classes. These are the unseen people doing unseen jobs who don't get any kind of, recognition or acknowledgement. And so it was beautiful to see this connection of sorts, fused between Anora and Igor. The heavy, essentially. But as I say, I do think it was 20 minutes long, and I think it lost its intensity. It lost its sense of comedy, but it also diluted that sense of the underscore of kind of her moral kind of journey. I think we lost that a little bit as we got obsessed with, in a sense, the rapport that was going on between this ensemble of four weird characters, because the other guy has forever got a broken nose from where she kicked him, and he's vomiting everywhere because he's always feeling sick because of the drugs he's had to take. A great movie. But despite those kind of grievances, I'd give this 92 out of 100. 92 out of 100.